killing them with kindness, it was called. If we give them transport, we give them good rail network, they may not rebel. Every single piece of land had to be negotiated with the owner.
Was it contracted out?
Mass labour. We hired 100 men.
No machinery?
Very little machinery.
And how did that affect the people and the economy when, say, Buncrana was linked with Derry?
Oh, it was a huge boost. Not only from a day tripper point of view. Lough Swilly Hotel was built 1866 to coincide with the opening of the railway. This was a luxury hotel in Buncrana. Tubin was a junction, and when it came to Letterkenny to Tubin, it was a changeover to a different line, and you went on to Buncrana.
So the train actually went from Tubin to Letterkenny?
It went along the treaty bank.
Around the water?
Along the water's edge. The traders in Letterkenny were very much in favour of getting their goods moved to Tubin, then on to Derry. And Burton Port Extension Railway, the LBNER, huge numbers left on that train to go to what's called the Scotch boat, which was the boat to Scotland, and the American liners at Moville. The First World War was very important because Lough Swilly was a very strategic port. It was a deep water port. Canal being the main population centre on the banks of Lough Swilly, it was very important for the British Navy. You're stopping the bridge end now and there's a customs man getting on and he's going, what have you got in that bag? You haven't paid the duty on that. IRA stopping people, asking people where they're going, who they are. The LNLSR had been warned by Republicans during the War of Independence not to carry soldiers on the train, but they did. And there was a couple of incidents where trains were stopped and derailed because of that. January 1925, there was a really bad storm and one of the carriages was blown off the viaduct and there's 4 people killed. The station master wrote to the head office in Pennyburn and said there's a train went through last night at 9 o'clock without prior knowledge of this train coming and it could have been a disaster. To be able to get on a train and to go miles and miles and miles across the countryside was a big step forward, a big change for a lot of people.
Welcome back to Life in Depth. I'm Ryan McDade. I have a gentleman by the name of John McCarron from Buncrana, Donegal. He's a local historian, artist and sculptor. And on the episode, we're going to be talking about the Donegal Railway, when and where it started, why it started, the history of it, going from Letterkenny to Buncrana to Carndonagh to Burton Port, how it was used, and stories along the way, how it impacted the community, the people, the economy, immigration, and yeah, lots of other stories intertwined with it. So I hope you enjoy. John, a pleasure to have you today.
Thanks very much for asking me.
I'm curious to learn more about the Lough Swilly Donegal Railway that would have connected Derry, Donegal, Letterkenny in general.
Yep.
And yeah, so where can we start?
Well, a good starting point would be 100 years before the inception of the railway, which was about 1763-ish, when a group of wealthy traders in Derry decided that they weren't getting the trade from what they considered their hinterland, which is Donegal and beyond, in this terms of goods. They weren't getting, they saw a huge agricultural area in Donegal, fish, wool, potatoes, turnips and stuff, and they wanted to find a better way of getting goods to Derry. So they proposed to build a canal from Burnfoot to Derry, 5 miles long. Now it was a proposal, but it wasn't grounded in any really engineering knowledge. It was just a proposal to cut this canal across from Burnfoot to Derry, which would have turned Inishowen back into an island, because it was always a boggy stretch there, but it wasn't truly an island, it was a peninsula. But if they had cut that canal, it would have made Inishowen an island. But they were met with lots of engineering challenges, which they didn't really consider. The main one being tidal surge. If you cut a canal connecting 2 large bodies of water, Lough Swilly and Lough Foyle, there's going to be surges, there's going to be tidal ranges. And it was quickly realised that in order to make it work, they would have to build embankments which would have prevented the tidal flow. Basically like locks, kind of like locks and canals, but the idea would have been to equalise the levels between Lough Foyle and Lough Swilly and to prevent tidal surges. So if they cut a canal, there was a tidal surge, a big tide came in, flooded the whole area, it would have been a disaster. So they began looking for an Act of Parliament, and they got an Act of Parliament passed eventually um, before 1900, which allowed them to create this canal. But what they soon realised was to build these embankments, and when the embankments, if they had been built, they would have it would have enclosed a large area of really excellent agricultural ground, which would have been reclaimed from the sea, being what is called the slobland, or uh, the flat lands there at Burnfoot. So as time went on, it became less about the canal and more about the possibilities of developing 2,200 acres of good alluvial agricultural soil. So it became a more enticing and a more lucrative enterprise to develop this land rather than the canal.
And was that, when you say develop the land, is that what's known as the slab?
That's the slab, yeah.
Okay.
So as time went on, there were several attempts were made to raise the money to get proper engineering. There was an engineering report done it. They got a proper engineer, civil engineering study done on it, and it was, they think, feasible. But this went on, this dragged on over decades, and the canal it became less about the canal, more about the reclamation of the land. There was supposed to be reclaimed land in Lough Swilly, which never happened, but that was part of the scheme. But as time went on, technology moved on, and the railways came along. So the embankments were then perfectly suited to the building of railways. So the canal idea was completely dropped. The railway idea
Had they started anything with the canal at the time?
no
So
canal was ever
Never,
dug.
no progress.
But what they did do is when they started draining the land for the reclamation of the land, draining the sea, the railways came along sort of in tandem with it. And the first bit of railway was from Derry, and it ran to Farland Point, which is not far from here. And it was a broad gauge, was 5'3" line, or standard gauge as it's called, which is quite a large railway. Then that ran from Derry to Farland Point.
And the purpose of that at that time?
The purpose of that was to get goods. They thought that they could take goods and fish and run it into Lough Swilly. But it quickly became obvious that a passenger line was going to be much more lucrative. So they extended the line to Buncrana.
What period was that line was built?
1863.
From Derry to Farland Banking?
Yeah.
So it was strictly for goods?
It was for goods. It was. Now, I'm not sure actually if they had, but it was envisaged for goods, and it wasn't envisaged as a day trip or anything. There's nothing at Farland Point, anyways. You probably know.
So boats would have been out around the Swilly, and then come there, and then the goods transported to Derry. Why wouldn't they say like the boats went into the Foyle as opposed to Farland?
Well, there would have been a lot of fish in the Swilly back then, herring and stuff, and they saw it as a sort of an artery into Donegal, as a means of getting goods into the port of Derry and into the market in Derry.
And at the time, Ireland, what was the situation in terms of the way the country was? It was united at the time?
Well, it was still under British rule, but it's an interesting point because as slightly later on, when they developed the line to Buncrana, they changed the gauge to what's called narrow gauge, which is 3 foot. It's a much smaller, narrower. The lines are just 3 foot apart, the rails, but it means that you can run much lighter engines. They were all steam powered, obviously. When you're able to run lighter engines, it made the running costs a lot less.
So steam, the fuel is coal, yeah.
But this was shortly after the famine and all the upheaval and emigration of the mid-19th century, and Lord Balfour in England, who was the guy overseeing all this, he had a policy to try to appease the Irish people. They called it killing them with kindness. It was called. It was basically, if we give them transport, we give them good rail network, they may not rebel, they may decide that they're happy with their lot. So it was a policy, a deliberate policy called killing them with kindness. So the railway was a great success. The trips from Derry, the day trippers from Derry to Donegal to Buncrana was a great boost for Buncrana. Buncrana really boomed over the head.
And what year would that have been extended in?
1866.
So 3 years later.
3 years later.
And that was strictly a passenger.
Well, it's passenger and goods, but immediately they saw that the Fairland Point was a dead duck, so they just scrapped that one and they developed it, Buncrana, Derry to Buncrana, and it was a very successful line.
How long would it have taken them to build that from Tubin to Buncrana?
I'm not sure of the actual time it took them to build it, but I know that when they changed the line from standard gauge to narrow gauge from Derry down to Tubin Junction, they did it over a weekend, which is a phenomenal feat.
Jesus.
But yeah, there would have been a lot of manpower. It was something that probably took a couple of years to build. I'm not exactly sure of the time frame, but I know it would have took a couple of years to get. There's a lot of engineering involved. Obviously the embankments had to be built, cuts, so on, viaducts. There was a lot of work on it.
And what were the stations in from Derry? What were they? Where did they start?
Well, Derry, you had Pennyburn. Pennyburn was the rail.
Is there any building there still existing of Pennyburn for the train?
Well, where Pennyburn train station was is directly opposite Pennyburn Chapel, where Budget DIY and all those stores. That was the main rail hub for the LNLS, or it was called the Londonderry and Lough Swilly Railway. Now it went from, there were some small stops along the way, but the main ones then was Bridgend, then Burnfoot, Tubin, Inch Road, and then down into Buncrana.
So was Tubin a stop? Like, could you get on there? Because I know it was a junction, but there wasn't really anyone living around there.
There was no one living there. There was no. The only way to get there wasn't even a road there. You could get there by bicycle. But Tubin was a junction, and what Tubin was the train ran. They developed the line to Letterkenny, and when it came to Letterkenny to Tubin, it was a changeover. So you changed over to a train to a different line, and you went on to Buncrana.
So the train actually went from Tubin to Letterkenny.
It did, yeah.
Was that extended from the Fairland?
It was basically, it went along the Treaty Bank. If you know the Treaty Bank, it went along there. It was basically
around the water,
along the water's edge.
Yeah, the walk there now.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Letterkenny, the traders in Letterkenny were very much in favour of getting their goods moved to Tubin and then on to Derry.
Right.
So the line diverged at Tubin. It was called the junction. It wasn't even called. It was a very important train station, and that it was called the junction because it was the main line to Letterkenny ran one way. The line went to Buncrana the other way, and carrying on it went to Derry.
So if you wanted to go Letterkenny, you got off to the junction, jumped on, and then right up through the flatlands. I assume when I call flatlands, down the lowland.
That's right.
Along Newton, Burt, Newton Manor. And what were the stations in? Along, like, whereabouts were they at?
Yeah,
because it's so far away from the town, the villages now. Like,
yeah, it is. Yeah, but I mean, it actually managed to miss a lot of the main towns. Maybe that was deliberate, maybe not. But you have to remember, this was a new transport system. They weren't that bothered about roads really. They wanted, their idea was that the railway was the transport. You weren't relying on a road. So the trains ran to their designated stations, not necessarily to accommodate anybody using a road. Obviously, there was back then it was bicycles, horse and carts back then, so roads weren't as important then as they are now. And the success of the roads actually led to the development of the roads and the development of the lorries and cars, and signalled the death knell of the railway further down the line. But it was a great success for Buncrana.
So you had Inch, and then Inch Road,
Fawn,
and then straight into Buncrana.
Then you had a few halts in along the way. You had Beach Halt and Lamberton's Halt and so on.
And it would have stopped at every single one each time.
Well,
There's no one there.
Different trains at different halting points, but like the Express, for example, would have went from Derry, probably stopping at Burnfoot, Fawn and Buncrana. Whereas then maybe the goods train or a mixed train might have stopped at every wee thing
Yeah.
along the way, you know.
And how did that affect the people and the economy then when say Buncrana was linked with Derry?
Oh, it was a huge boost, and not only from the day tripper point of view. Lough Swilly Hotel was built in 1866 to coincide with the opening of the railway, and this was a luxury hotel in Buncrana, which is kind of unheard of, if you know what I mean. But it put Buncrana on the map, because if you look at the old literature for Lough Swilly, it was come to Buncrana. Look, we have great fishing, we have great game shooting, we have all the stuff that you wouldn't really associate with Buncrana now. They're talking about loads of people going to shoot partridge and pheasant and up in the hills, and it's all gone, but it was very much of its time, and it was a great boost to Buncrana as well. But all these day trippers, apparently the trains were literally jam packed on a Sunday or weekends or bank holidays. They had all sorts of special events on, fairs and horse racing and everything, to because they had the means to move people. And it became one of the reasons, I think, that it became, if you ask anybody and if you tell them they're area from Buncrana, they think, oh, well, Buncrana's our backyard, or they think that there's somehow own a wee part of Buncrana, lots of Derry people, you know what I mean? That's just from I suppose from the tradition of going to Buncrana, Even today, even on the good days, those buses, well, Lough Swilly doesn't run anymore, but McGonagall's bus there on the good days still full of day trippers to Buncrana, young people.
So the main station then in Buncrana would have been the Drift-In?
Drift-In, yeah.
Yes.
That's right.
And was that built just for that, or was anything existing there at the time?
No, it was built specifically for...
And who built that?
It was built by the L&LSR. It was built by an English engineer, was the guy in charge of it. I don't know his name, but I know that it was seen as the jewel in the crown of the L&LSR, because it was this purpose-built, fine building, architecturally very nice to look at.
Still is.
And still is, yeah. And then beside that, they had the heron processing, fishery processing grew up beside it. Just on up a bit from it, they had the boats came into the pier at Buncrana, the heron boats. The heron was shipped over to a heron processing station there, where basically beside where the municipal golf links is now, just in there. And the heron was processed. It was salted, put in barrels, and shipped on trains, special fish carriages, and it was shipped to Derry, where lots of it ended up in places like Germany and Poland, where they have huge fish as almost like a staple diet. It was a huge industry for years, until a couple of things happened. It was overfished. The Lough Swilly was overfished, so there was a huge drop, sort of a sudden drop in their take because of overfishing. Because it was a boom and a boom and a boom, and then they sort of killed it. But because there was being so much fish landed, the price fell out of it. The prices fell, and there was no money to be made in. So people started looking. The heron dealers started looking at other places in Scotland and so on. And so that killed it. But it was, the reason it was there was because of the railway. So it was just one offshoot of the railway. You have Lough Swilly Hotel, of course, as well.
And when the companies were building them railways, obviously there's a lot of land there to be acquired, a straight piece of land. How were agreements made, and building the stations as well?
Yeah, well, I was looking at a map up in the Tower Museum. One of the fellas up there, education officer Roland McConnell, was good enough to show me a series of maps that they have in the stores up there, and it's a parcel. One piece I was looking at was a stretch of land from Buncrana to Donegal, which is 3 miles, and it followed the line along. And at the bottom of it's a big, large chart. At the bottom, it had the gradient that showed you how the hills, the railway ran up into the hills, that steadily climbed on the gradient. But each parcel of land, every single field was marked, and every single piece of land had to be negotiated with the owner. It had to be bought off the owner. It might have to be levelled. It might have to be raised. It might have to be dug down. It might have to be drained. It might have to be stoned. So it was a huge undertaking. And there's these charts, there's a series of them that they hold up there. Now, they don't have them all, but they do have the section from Buncrana, I think, to maybe to Cairndonagh. That was the Cairndonagh extension. But it gives you an idea of just the amount of work, the amount of negotiating, and the amount of almost horse trading that had to be done, because each parcel of land had to be bought.
Yeah. And was it kind of a situation where they were forced to sell it?
Yeah, I don't know if they had much choice. I think they were probably maybe browbeaten into it a wee bit, in the sense that the railway, this is going to be good for everybody. You can't stand in the way of it. But of course, there
wasn't like any rental agreements.
Not that I know of. No, there was no rental agreement. I think it was just a straight buy this piece of land. The rail line itself wasn't very wide, so you're only talking maybe if you had an acre field and it was cutting across it, you might only be talking maybe 40 square yards or something. You know, so it wasn't a huge amount of money. And of course, it wasn't that busy. So if you had cattle or livestock, you could still. There's no need for tunnels or bridges for livestock. You could still just graze them, and the trains didn't run. They weren't bullet trains or anything. They ran quite slowly, you know.
Yeah.
So I'd never heard of any animals ever being killed or injured by trains. I don't think it really happened much, you know.
Was it contracted out then? So like tendered out, and then people got the opportunity to take on this line?
It seemed to be a case that they hired mass labour as was maybe they hired 100 men, you know, and paid them paid them, you know, a wage.
No machinery.
Very little machinery.
What if they did? What was it?
It would have been a steam, would have been a steam crane, which would as the line was built and each bit, they would have had a railway crane, which is basically a crane which ran on the railway. It went along and lifted into place the sleepers and the line as it was needed. That's how it was done. So, yes. And lots of places was totally inaccessible. They didn't have any roads. The only way they could get in was railway. So they had wee bogies and stuff like that for taking men and machinery. But I think most of the men, it was you walked to work and walked home, as far as I can gather.
And when it connected Buncrana, because it's a major town in the area, obviously Derry is another major town at the time. Did that change, like migration? Obviously, you talked about tourism. Did more people leave because it was more accessible?
Well, that's a very interesting point, because in 1901, the Buncrana to Derry line was very successful in the sense that it paid its way. Now, initially, the British government had set this up, and it had been incorporated into where some people owned lots of shares, and that's how it worked. A fellow called Sir Basil McFarlane was the head man. But anyway, they saw a need to extend the line from Buncrana to Cairndonagh. That was in 1901. They opened that line. And that was successful, but it was never. It was successful in the sense that it worked and it got people to where they needed to go, but it never paid its way. They also opened the line to Burtonport.
With the Cairn, or the line to Cairn, funnily, you know, I was in the Lake of Shadows there last week, and I went to the toilets and I came out and I seen a big photo of Buncrana, and I had seen that photo before, but obviously I had never been looking. But I always wondered where the railway went through the town, and I realised that it went down by the Scarvey.
That's right,
and out behind the town and
Marion Park,
right across. I couldn't believe it.
Across,
because I always thought it went across the bridge, but then I was like, "There's no real history, or like, you know, the streets just didn't fit it, you know." But
right.
So out behind the town, then to Cockhill was the next stop.
Hilltown was just behind Cockhill Chapel. It's called Hilltown up there.
Yeah.
Next one then it ran out then behind to Ballymcgan Station. Beautiful big station house still there. Ballymcgan. Next one then was Kennigo Halt. If you're driving to just past the Umricam garage there, you'll see what's left of an old railway crossing hut, stone hut still there. And then on to the next one was Dumfries, where the North Pole Bar is. That was the next one. Then the next one then went on then to Mindorn, which is the far side of the Minchies, the far side of Minchy Lough down there.
Where's that now? Sorry.
Mandorn is, if you're going to, you come to the North Pole Bar
Yeah.
by road, you go left. You
So
go
that
to-
was a station too.
That was a
North
station.
Pole, yeah.
So you're going left there towards Kilmanny.
Yep.
Well, as you drive along there, on the right hand side,
Yep.
it's covered by trees, but there's an old sort of viaduct in there, a bridge. So it ran from there on to Kilmanny. Then from Kilmanny, then it ran on to Ballyliffin and Rashini, on out, if you know that road, out past through Ballyliffin, out past Nancy's Barn, past the
Yeah.
golf club, out there, into Cairndonagh. It ran into Cairndonagh. And the Cairndonagh station is still there now. It's a fish factory or some fish processing plant beside it there.
Is that beside the shop fitting company? No.
Yeah, it's the other side of the road,
I know there.
just there.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was the terminus of.
That was the last
Cairndonagh.
stop.
Yeah.
And that was built in 1901.
1901. But it didn't. No, it was a great success in the sense that it got people, to where they wanted to go, but it never paid its way. But
Was that because the population in that area was a lot less than Buncrana?
Yeah, it didn't have the same. It didn't have the same footfall that Derry and Buncrana had, because Buncrana had these beaches and they had so much going on, and it's just had this historic
Seaside
connection.
town as well.
And seaside town, whereas Cairndonagh, is a market town, and has always been a market town, and even says on the sign, welcome to Cairndonagh, the historic market town. But you're asking a question about immigration. Around the same time, it was decided to build the line to Burtonport. That was a huge undertaking. That was called the Letterkenny and Burtonport Extension Railway, the LBNER, but it was operated by the Lough Swilly. That was 77 miles, and the idea of that was to get fish, mostly fish and agricultural goods, into Letterkenny and onwards to Derry, to markets in Derry, if it was required. But what happened was, while it was successful in that, trains ran both ways, and it was a huge opportunity for people to leave, to emigrate. Huge numbers left on that train to go to what's called the Scotch boat, which was the boat to Scotland, and the American liners at Moville, so to Derry.
Moville?
Yeah, there was no railway line at Moville, but the American liners which ran cross transatlantic routes, it was Derry to Boston, Derry to Canada, places like that, and the big liners couldn't come in, so you got your ticket in Derry. You were taken on a boat on the foil, a small, or taken by road to Moville and put on a tender, taken out and put on the big liner. So lots of people went that way to Derry, took the opportunity of getting trained to Derry, and lots of people, it was the last time they ever went.
So in one way, it was kind of counterproductive.
It was, yeah.
It was a gateway for people
It certainly
to get
was.
out.
Yeah.
Because obviously, I assume then that the opportunity, there wasn't much there at the time.
Well, I mean, it was that line managed to miss nearly every centre of population. I don't know if that was by design. Probably it was, but the places that it ran through,
This is the Burtonport
the
line.
Burtonport line,
Yeah.
they were bleak.
Yeah.
And there's no other way to describe it. The word bleak,
It's funny because I was out there a few months ago at a house, staying literally on, and I couldn't believe it,
Is that Cashel na Gore now?
behind Mount Derrigal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it runs through a few little hills, like, you
Yep,
know.
yep.
But it was bleak.
Yeah.
It's quiet out there.
And you can imagine what it was like 150 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, 100 years ago, whatever. Yeah.
Did it affect Buncrana much in my immigration?
Not to the same extent, no. I mean, there's a great tradition in West Donegal going to Scotland. And if you've ever been to Glasgow, half of Glasgow's from West Donegal, and vice versa. And a lot of it was to do with traditional tatty hoking, as they call it, gathering potatoes, gathering turnips, stuff like that. So while there was lots of immigration here, obviously, and then shown as well, but much more so in the West. I think here people had better opportunities. Mightn't have had much, but we seem to have more opportunity than. I mean, even today, we think nothing of jumping in a car and going to Derry into department stores, or if you're in Gweedore or Crawley or Burtonport or somewhere. I mean, you don't have you have to drive to Letterkenny or drive to Donegal town or Sligo. Where we're much more. I think and that's only my own personal opinion.
Yeah.
Is that we're much more connected to those sort of modern retail things.
Yeah. So it made Derry more accessible for, you could say, Inishowen and Letterkenny
Yep.
as such. What did that enable people to travel more in Ireland? So, like, I know you can go from Derry to Belfast, but was there a Derry Dublin line at the time?
Well, there was at one time in Donegal there were three separate railways operating. So while they weren't actually connected, I mean Letterkenny had two railway stations. You had the LNLSR and you had the Donegal County Railway, the CDR it was called, the County Donegal Railway, um, and um, it connected to Strabane. So and then in Strabane you had the GNR, which was the Great Northern Railway, which connected to Omagh and on to right across the country to Dublin, and of course to Belfast as well. So you had you had greater connectivity if you want. You could make a railway journey 100 years ago or more. You could. I mean, I have seen railway tickets, L and LSR tickets from Buncrana to Dublin, like a railway ticket. How do you get to Buncrana to Dublin? Railway. You went to Derry. You got on the Derry line to Omagh.
You had to cross the bridge.
Yeah,
So there's another line.
there's another line. Yeah,
And there was another line from Derry to Letterkenny. Was there two lines that went into Derry from Donegal?
there was. Yeah,
And through
one went.
St Johnson and Carrigan's?
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the CJ, or it was called. The Joint Commission, which was just another name for a railway setup. But basically, it also ran to Glenties
Okay.
and ran to Ballyshannon. So I mean, back then you were much better connected by rail.
Then you're saying Strabane, the Omagh.
Strabane to Omagh, and then from Omagh you go either to GN or you could go to Belfast or you could go to Dublin.
And was that a direct line? As in, when I say direct line,
Yeah,
was it a company that had that one rail?
Great Northern Railway.
Okay, so that went from Dublin to.
To Strabane. You could get a train from Dublin. I don't know if you had to change at Omagh. I don't think so. I think you could go right to, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But I know that there was much better connectivity back then. But
And travel time?
travel
Even
time,
from Letterkenny or from Buncrana to Derry, even?
well, they say that you could do. It's been said that you could do. There was an express train that took lots of professional people in Derry, built nice houses in Buncrana. If you look on the way into Buncrana, there's a lovely row of red brick houses called the Crescent, and they're built just beside the railway station, which was the Drift Inn, and they were all built for professional people in Derry, solicitors, doctors, and so on. So they say that you could be in Derry in 20 minutes. You got the train from Buncrana, you were in Derry in 20 minutes, which should be good going today.
Mm.
Mm.
Yes. So, speedways then? Would they been.
Didn't do huge speed, no. They weren't massively fast or anything, but the stories about people getting off and walking and all this kind of crack, and some of that's maybe not true, but they didn't have huge speed, but I mean the engines that they had to get specially built for the Burton Port, the line from Letterkenny to Burton Port, they had to run. It was 77 miles, and they had to be specially built so that they could do it in one run without stopping to refuel for coal. So they had a big coal wagon on them. But they were the biggest ever narrow gauge engines ever built.
And so, would somebody had to been on the line firing in coal all the time?
Well, you had a driver and a fireman, and his job was to constantly feed the firebox with coal. So yeah, it was,
Yes. Even just going from Derry to Buncrana?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. They called her up in the morning. You lit the fire 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. Got the fire going. You got the fire up to temperature. You got the steam going, and when you had it at the right temperature, to produce the steam needed for the engine, you had to keep it at that temperature, so you had to constantly feed it high-grade coal.
And how many carts would there have been?
Other than one. Oh, how many carriages?
Carriages? Or
Oh, that just depends on what they were pulling, but they could pull. No, they could pull a train. Like I have seen photographs of trains, maybe 7 or 8 carriages, no problem.
from Derry to Buncrana?
Yeah, yeah.
And would they have been different classes?
Mixed goods. Sometimes you had open carriages. Sometimes you had fish carriages, which were just carriages, box carriages that you would see on films, which would just empty carriages, and then you had first class carriages, second class carriages, and I think you had maybe third class carriages as well. Now there wasn't. You can see there's one there's one carriage up in the Foyle Valley Railway. You can see what it looked like, and it was basic stuff. It wasn't. It was slats. The boards were just slats. The engines, the carriages were quite narrow because the running gear was only 3 foot wide. So the carriage went out the other side of that. So really and truly, maybe the whole carriage might have been much more than 6 foot wide. So you had people parked on the other side. So it was quite a.
Do you know what? I did wonder about that because the walkway that you can go around there,
Yeah,
an inch,
yeah.
at Tubin Junction,
Mm-hmm.
I assume that there's a bridge there. I don't know if you noticed it or not, or a bridge that you could walk over. I
Yeah,
think because there's two tunnel like or arches, and they're very narrow.
They are, yeah.
And I look at today's trains and like, there's not a hope in
No.
hell that you need the two of them for
That's right.
one. They must have been so narrow.
Yeah, they were small. Wasn't a miniature railway, but it wasn't. I mean, they weren't huge, big things.
So people would have been facing each other, sitting down the side,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people's expectations back then, were much different. If you could get on a train, whereas everybody walked everywhere, or if you had a horse and cart or whatever. But I mean,
Or a bike.
or a bike. But bicycles weren't that common really until maybe around the turn of the 19th, 20th century, I think. So, to be able to get on a train and to be able to go miles and miles and miles across the countryside was a big step forward, a big change for a lot of people. And of course, you had the disaster over in 1925 over at the Owen Carrow Viaduct, where it's a viaduct is a bridge for taking a train across a valley, and there's a viaduct. It's called the Owen Carrow Viaduct between Kilmacrennan and Creasla. And in January 1925, there was a really bad storm, and one of the carriages was blown off the viaduct, and there's 4 people killed. And it made international headlines because it was a railway disaster. It was a very unusual thing to happen. So they changed the rules then. They took more care of one speed and stuff, and the trains were stopped if the one got above a certain, whereas before they didn't take that much notice of it.
I had a conversation about that with someone recently, and what we were talking about is, did the driver know that night that could potentially happen, or was it just like, will we find it won't happen, or because I assume they would have knew that the weather would have been windy, it would have been a bad night.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it was the 100th anniversary was there in January past.
Yes.
And I did read somewhere that there was. They didn't think it was as bad as what it turned out to be, and where that is very exposed, and maybe it's easy with hindsight to say, okay, maybe they should have stopped the train, but it might have been a freak gust that just caught them, and unfortunately there was people killed, there was other people injured as well. So, but it was a major disaster at the time.
It was the only one in Donegal.
It was only one, yeah. The only time that other people, there have been other people killed by the train, through accidents, but not not like a mass casualty event like that,
And when people are getting on the train, you bought your ticket at the station.
Yep.
And then was there someone on the train or before you got on the train, or how did that work?
No, there's an inspector on the train. You got your ticket, you went on the train, and the inspector literally came around, punched your ticket. If you hadn't got a ticket, as far as I know, you could buy a ticket off him, or you could get off at the next station and buy a ticket.
Yes.
I've been told that's how it worked.
Yeah. Could people buy like a week ticket, or like was there different types of options?
Oh, there was indeed. I've seen the ticket collecting, and what's called Railwayana is a very big hobby for a lot of people, particularly in England. Not so much in Ireland, but very big in England. And you can see there's specialist sort of forums and websites where you can buy tickets. And Lough Swilly railway tickets are much sought after because there's a great love for the Lough Swilly Railway because it was the largest narrow gauge system running, and because it ran through Donegal, which everybody loved, everybody had fond memories of. There seems to be a great love for it. So therefore, the tickets, anything that's a bit unusual, collectors would love it. And I've actually saw one. It was a pass. This guy who had worked on the railway for something like 40 or 50 years, and he was retired, and they gave him a pass. So basically, he was this pass. He could just get on any train he wanted. So there was all sorts of different excursion tickets, school, people going to school could get a certain ticket for going to school as well. So yeah, a bit like if you went to school on the Swilly bus, it was the same thing. Even I remember getting a school ticket and having to show it to an inspector on the bus saying, "Look, here's my school ticket. I'm allowed on here." You know, but we'll get on to the Swilly buses in a wee minute. But the train, the Lough Swilly or the Burton Port extension was never paid its way either, and that was eventually closed down. But then during the Second World War, they reopened a bit from Gweedore to Letterkenny was reopened because they couldn't get diesel. Coal was plentiful, but diesel and petrol couldn't be got because of the war, because of the Second World War. So they actually reopened a bit of it, but it was short lived. In 1951, 53, then it was closed, and there's a couple of different reasons. The Second World War, but kind of jumping ahead a wee bit here, but what really spelled the death knell was partition, was the Civil War, the War of Independence, and then partition, because you're coming from Derry to Buncrana, you're stopping at Bridgend now, and there's a customs man getting on, and he's going, "What have you got in that bag?" You know what I mean? You haven't paid the duty on that. So then people were smuggling stuff. Of course, traders and people, retailers, wholesalers, moving stuff, all had to pay a customs fee then. So it became, whereas before it was a free passage. After 1922, it became a hard border, and it caused lots of problems. And I mean, I've even seen photographs of during the War of Independence and afterwards of paramilitaries stopping the train at Burnfoot, guys with guns, IRA, I suppose, questioning people, stopping people, asking people where they're going, who they are, and they had been the LNLSR had been warned by Republicans during the War of Independence not to carry soldiers on the train, but they did, and there was a couple of incidents where trains were stopped and derailed because of that. But there was never any major firefights that I know of. But I know that it does cause a lot of some animosity because the railway workers were doing their job. They were there to ferry people from one place to another. They weren't getting involved in politics. Whereas some guy was saying, "You can't have him on the train," you know. And of course, a group of British soldiers turned up and said, "We're going to Letterkenny," you know. I mean, what could they do? One could stop them, you know.
Well, before I do want to talk about that, one of the things that was on my mind is when the train station was built in towns or villages or areas, what impact did that have in the surrounding area?
Yeah, well,
like what sprung up from that? I assume other businesses.
Other businesses sprung up. The main one, which seemed to be spring up almost everywhere, was a public house. And I suppose the reason for that is that where you have people congregating and waiting on trains, it's natural for people to, what are we going to do? We're going to go and have a drink. Lots of deals were done in pubs. I mean, like we're talking about Cairndonagh being a market town. I mean, lots of people used to go to the mart on a Monday, but the dealing was done in the pub. It wasn't done at the mart. It was you go to the pub and have a drink, and it was the same sort of thing. So you had, from a local point of view, you had Fawn, for example, had a pub beside it.
That's the Railway Tavern.
The Railway Tavern but at the time it was there was a pub beside it. Wasn't the Railway Tavern was the railway station. Interestingly enough, there's a very famous guy. He's a sort of a hero of mine called James Bond, who was the station master in Fawn, and he saw that there was this woman he was in dispute with. She was running a pub in another part of the building, which didn't belong to the railway, apparently. So he opened his own pub, and he was told by the railway company to close it down because they had lots of issues with drinking on the job, and it was a sort of an occupational hazard. As you had maybe 4 trains a day, and you were working in the railway station. There was a pub right beside it. You had nothing else to do, so people sort of gravitated towards. And lots of people, well, not lots of people, but people lost their jobs over drunkenness, over maybe station master before James Bond was dismissed because he left a goods train on the line while there was a passenger train coming through and it almost caused an accident. So he was dismissed, and it was discovered the reason that he'd been negligent was because he'd been drunk. So it was a double-edged sword, but it was a great meeting point. And you think of places like North Pole Bar, that was a railway station, obviously. Ballymeggan, you had the big house pub right beside Ballymeggan station, and that was the centre of everything, because you had the mail coming in there, you had goods coming in there, you had people coming in there. And of course, the mail was being the main ones, because everybody was waiting on the letter from America with the money on it, you know. That's just the way it was, you know.
So it was a post office, it was a pub.
Yep.
Would it have been a shop too?
The problem.
Bread and butter,
Yeah,
milk, stuff.
So you had everything going on. It was the centre of, it became places like, you know, Ballymeggan. Well, the post office in Ballymeggan was just up around the corner, but I mean, basically, yeah, it was, you know, it was the centre of everything. Obviously, people gravitated towards it because you had the trains coming, people, as I say, goods, mail, and so on, you know.
Yeah.
The post.
And you had two lines, always.
One line.
So how did they ensure that there was never two lines, trains on the one line?
Right.
Because if they don't have any, maybe they did have a phone line.
No. You had, when you stopped at a station, you stopped at, let's say you stopped at Ballymeggan station, and you were going, the next stop was Dumfries station. You were given a thing called a key, and it was a big long wooden baton with brass rings in it, sort of in it. I'm not sure what the purpose of that was. I think it was so easy to hand to somebody else. But while you had that key, nobody else could be on the line. That's the way it worked. Simple as that. So now they did have sidings, whereas if there was a train coming the other way, you went to the siding and you pulled into the siding and you waited till the other train went past.
And did they have them every
they had them mostly at stations. They wouldn't have had them along the line now, but they would have had them at stations, and they would have obviously had signals as well, you know what I mean to say. So if you had a train coming through at a certain time, you know, you would have to wait until that train passed before you were allowed on the line. But the key, literally. You had to have that before you could go that stretch of line. And those keys are highly sought after and very collectible as well, if you can find one. And each one had on it, I've seen a photograph of one in, there's a place in Wales, which is the Museum of the Narrow Gauge Railway, it's called. And in it has the Kilmany one. And it as part of one of its main exhibits. So it's, you know.
Okay, so let's just say if you're going from Derry to Buncrana,
okay,
I assume there was more than one train.
Yeah.
So there would have been, what do you call it? Siding?
Siding, yeah.
A siding would have been at every station,
Yeah.
two of them.
Yeah, now some of them also had turntables, so you could turn the train around and go back.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you got that, but could you, if you were at Derry, would you got a key just to each station, or was that the key to go the whole way?
No, to each station, each stretch of line only, because you could then be sure that you're not going to meet anything because you have that key.
Yeah.
So you handed that key when you got to, let's say, Burnfoot. You handed that key, and you got the key from Burnfoot to Tiven Junction. That key was given to the next guy, even if meant pulling in and going the other way. So it made sure that there could only ever be one train on the line at any one time.
Yes.
To avoid.
Okay. What happened then that the rail started to, I suppose, slacken or slow down, or?
Well, what happened was the growth of goods and lorries. Petrol became more available, diesel became more available, lorries and cars became more reliable, more accessible, and more affordable. Whereas before, in any town in the 1920s, let's say even the 30s, the priest, the doctor, had a car. Nobody else had a car, but because they couldn't afford them. But as cars, mass production went on, cars became cheaper, lorries became cheaper and more reliable. Goods started to be moved by road, and that signalled the death knell of the railway. And one of the advantages, of course, of moving goods by road is that you could deliver it right to where it was going. Whereas you're delivering goods by train, you have to go and get some guy with a lorry to take it from the train station. Why not just get the guy in the lorry to take it directly to me? That was one of the big downfalls of the railway.
Yes. And you also talked about the British coming in,
Yep.
jumping on the train. So there was a time then where obviously Ireland was fighting for its independence,
Hmm.
and Derry being Donegal, Derry connected to Buncrana was obviously a border point. So
Yep.
I assume that affected it a lot too.
Oh, the border was a huge, and not just at Letterkenny as well, of course, and Strabane. Looking at the other railways, the customs posts added maybe an hour to your journey. If you get the wrong customs man and he didn't like what he was seeing, you could take everybody off the train and search them, and then start searching maybe through goods wagons as well. Looking, and of course there was a lot of smuggling went on as well. But it it became.
Any
Uh,
stories on the smuggling?
I don't really have many stories on the smuggling, other than butter apparently was a big thing that was smuggled into Derry. People loved the Donegal, the home churned butter. Lots of butter was moved in apparently, and other stuff went out. But I'm not really, poaching was another one that went in apparently a lot, But I'm not really. Smuggling's a whole kind of a story on its own, if you know what I mean. But smuggling went on too, of course, by road as well. But there was lots of sort of almost folklore about things that happened, stories, the things that happened with the train. Everybody remembers train journeys. People who people who made train journeys on Lough Swilly, and most people are gone now. The last train ran 53, so it's a long time ago. 72 years ago. So there wouldn't be many people left who would have experienced a train journey on the Lough Swilly. But I mean, there's a famous 1939 story about the ghost train that ran from at Dumfries. At the station at Dumfries, where the North Pole bar is. If you look across the road, there's two big brown engineered brick pillars there, and that's where the train ran across the road. So there was a gate. Now the road wasn't as busy back then as you can imagine, but there was a gate that was pulled across while the train, like a level crossing. So anyways, one night, this train arrived, went through the station unannounced, and the station master wrote to Pennyburn, to the head office in Pennyburn, said there's a train went through last night at 9 o'clock without, I had no prior knowledge of this train coming, and it could have been a disaster. I didn't know. I could have had someone on the line. And he got the message back that there was no train. So he went to, he did a bit of asking about, and the people at the Kennygo crossing and the people at Ballymegan, they had seen the same train. And this train was seen 3 or 4 times, and it had the same 2 carriages on it, and it had a fireman and a driver on it. And the same, every time it was seen, it had the same people on it. It was a strange sort of a thing, and then it wasn't seen again after that. But it just shows you how deeply ingrained that anti-folklore almost that you had this ghost train. And it's a really interesting subject that nobody ever really, well, what was there to study? Only somebody's stories, but the fact that it was corroborated by a few other railway people make it, very interesting,
Yeah. And then I suppose there's a part of me wonder, I mean, people could come together too and say, we'll say this,
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
and make a folklore story as well.
Yeah, yeah. Although it's, I mean, I don't know, I'm sort of fascinated by that because
But where would the train have gone if it
disappeared into the night, heading for Clonmany. Yeah.
interesting?
Yeah, yeah. The fact that it happened more than once makes it interesting. Now, who knows?
Yeah, yeah.
Who knows? As you say, it might have been a nice one.
I mean, I'm open to everything,
Yes.
So that's fine then. Donegal Railway, it kind of dwindled in with obviously lorries coming on, roads being
Yep.
improved, cars become more accessible.
Yep.
How does that impact then the community?
Well, what they were smart enough to see that people still need moved about, and one of the things they'd done was they had, after the Second World War, they had invested in rail cars, and rail cars are basically buses that run on railway lines. If you can imagine an old 1930s bus, what those old buses look like, but it ran on train wheels or train carriage wheels. So they had a few of those going. There's one still intact up in the Foyle Valley Railway.
What fuel?
Diesel. it was apparently very smelly and very unreliable because according to the guide in Wild Valley, there was a lot of fumes, diesel fumes. Maybe it didn't burn as clean as what it burns nowadays, and it was quite smelly. But what they realised then was they moved. People still needed to be moved. They needed to be moved by road, so they set up the Londonderry and Lough Swilly bus company. But it operated as a railway. It was still the L and LSR. It was still called the Lough Swilly.
And so who owned that? Because I mind you saying that it was mass workers that built the railway.
Yeah.
So who owned the company?
It was
Originally when it was started.
It was owned by a sort of a corporation, a group of shareholders. Sir
Okay.
Basil McFarlane was the main one. He was the main shareholder, but he raised, and I suppose in a share issue, I don't know, but there was the people, local people, lots of sort of prominent or wealthy businessmen in Derry seemed to have shares in it. Now, it ran, of course, and they also ran, one of the things that was successfully run was it ran a train to Fawn and a spur off from Fawn to Fawn Pier, where they operated a steam ferry company, which ran to Rathmullen and Ramelton and Buncrana.
I've seen the photo of that.
Yeah, and Port Saling, yeah, beautiful big 120-foot paddle steam engines.
Yes. That's the big wheel paddle there.
Yeah. The wheel of the last one was called the Lake of Shadows, is in the Maritime Museum in Moville, or in Greencastle, if you want to see it. It's still there. It was presented by Basil McFarlane's people, presented it to them as a sort of a memento. But that was a very successful enterprise for a while. And during the First World War, when there was a lot of British Navy, the Grand Fleet was in the Swilly for a while in 1914. It was a very, very busy, obviously, ferrying men and goods across the Rathmullen, because the British Admiral called Admiral Jellicoe, he was in charge of the Grand Fleet, was it was called, which was basically the Royal Navy's Atlantic Fleet. Was called the Grand Fleet. They did have other ships, but it was stationed in a place called Scapa Flow, which is in Orkney, in north of Scotland, in this sort of a sheltered, protected bay. But they realised that the German U-boats could get in the First World War and sink ships, so they moved the entire fleet to Lough Swilly. They put a boom across an armoured net, for want of a better word, a net across from McCamish Point to Ned's Point, and closed off the Swilly. So anything coming in or out, you had to get through this gate, basically.
A fence the whole way across the Swilly.
Yeah,
like above the water.
It was called. They used a thing called a hawser, which was a steel rope.
Right. And pulled it tight.
Pulled it tight, and with a net, with a metal net, and it was called an anti-submarine net. Pulled it tight, and in the middle of it, it was pulled. It was actually pulled. They had old steam trawlers stationed in the middle of the Swilly, and they could open a part of it and close it and let ships in and out. That's how it worked.
But how was it fixated that you could open it and close it in the middle? Because if it's a steel rope across the whole Swilly.
Yeah, it ran to, as far as I know, it ran to a ship. I don't know exactly how they done it. If they had an anchor point, they must have had some sort of anchor point.
Maybe a pole in the water or
must
something.
have been, yeah. Or a buoy of some kind. But
And
yeah.
How deep is that water?
Oh, the Swilly's very deep, yeah. It varies in depth.
50 metres?
Yeah, in places, yeah. 50 metres, yeah. Now, the middle of the Swilly would be deep. But they had at Dunree, they had searchlights, they had watch stations, they had it all going on there at Dunree, so it was very hard to get past Dunree. They had guns, obviously. But while the Grand Fleet was in, the Admiral Jellicoe spent his headquarters was Lough Swilly Hotel, but he also spent a lot of time in Rathmullen. So he was going over and back. But the steam ferries at the time that was the time they were most busy, but they ran for years, and then eventually closed down in the 30s, I think. They sold it off to. They actually sold it to the Browns. They didn't sell the ships to the Browns, but they give the Browns the right to the fishermen from Inch the right to ferry people across, or the license to ferry people across.
And why was that popular at the time?
Um, well, it was a way at the time. Rathmullen, Ramelton, and Port Salon were quite remote, other than getting to there is. I mean, even driving to Rathmullen today, it's quite a narrow wee road. Even driving into it, obviously, it's much more accessible by sea. Ramelton's the same, so it was a way of connecting Derry to Ramelton, Rathmullen, Port Salon, um, and it seemed to work for those years that it ran. There was a couple of different piers then, and one of them was lost in a storm. Then they built a new pier, so they invested in a new pier. It must have been profitable, you know. And up until quite recently, there used to be an old crane for lifting goods from the train onto the ferry, and it sat there for years and years and years. And then Donegal County Council took it away during COVID, and put it up in Donegal town, which caused a bit of a row. But anyway, that's another story. Yeah, I was on Highland Radio scouting about it.
You were?
I was, I was, yeah. Well, just when we were talking about getting from the rail car there, I'll let you come back to that in a minute. Just
Yeah, I
with the rail
remember now.
car. Sorry, go ahead. You were going to say.
Yeah, I was going to say the Lough Swilly Hotel.
Yes,
What happened there? It's a fine big building.
it was a beautiful big building. Yeah, it was bought over by different people, and it never really made. It was a furniture store for a while. For Brian Flanagan had it for a furniture
But
store.
even the point where it, when it was a busy hotel, like what was the turning point? Just bad management or?
Yeah, it seemed to be. It seemed to be. I think there was an issue about rates. I think that was the death knell for it. Whoever owned it, now I don't know the ins and outs of it, but whoever owned it got into a dispute about rates, I think.
And when was that? When did it close down?
It closed down probably mid-80s.
Oh, so it ran to recent then.
Yeah, oh, it did, yeah.
And then it was knocked down.
Well, it became a furniture store for Brian Flanagan, the furniture
Okay.
guy in Buncrana. He had a furniture store for a good while. Then he moved to other premises, and he was using it, I think, kind of like a store and a showroom. But then it had a fire and was burnt in a fire, and then it lay for a long time.
Okay.
And then it had another fire in it, and eventually it was nothing left. So it's a shame. Yeah.
Because I don't ever remember a hotel being there.
Right.
And I was born in 1990.
Well, there's photographs from around about the turn of the 19th, 20th century of the lobby of it, and it was beautiful. It was like someone out of the Raj in India. It was really, really very, very luxurious hotel. Really
Yeah.
top.
Fine
top
view there too. Like
And a fine view, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I've seen the photo again in the lake where there's loads of like little houses on the shorefront.
Yeah, that was the British Army camp.
So they set up camp there.
They were camped there for a long time.
When?
They also had a camp in London.
When did they?
Well, the Irish Army took it over in 22, and it became an Irish Army camp.
But the British, when did they go in
They
and set it up?
well, it had been there since, well, at least since the First World War, which is 1914. Buncrana at the time of the First World War was very important because it was Lough Swilly was a very strategic port. It was a deep water port. It was talked about the Grand Fleet being in there. So Buncrana being the main population centre on the banks of Lough Swilly, it was very important for the British Navy as a place to base their operations. So much so that in the First World War, it was called the camp there was called HMS. Shore camps are also called HMS, His Majesty's ships. It was called HMS Hecla. Was the name given to it. So it was a very important base, and then you had Dunree as well, of course. But it was so. I mean, you had the camp at Ludden, you had the camp at Buncrana, you had Dunree, Inch Fort, McCamish.
Inch Fort.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
But now Inch Fort, now they were built. They were built for the Napoleonic Wars. They were built in 1798 after when the
1798.
Yeah,
That sunk into the ground too. From the water, you don't see it. Like
that's right. Same as
so, they dug that out.
They dug it out. Yeah, they put it there. They thought the British at the time thought that the French were going to invade or attack Britain by the back door through Ireland. Wolfe Tone had gone to France, raised a French army, a fleet of ships. He was coming into Lough Swilly, October 1798. He had a sea battle with the British. His ship was captured. It was called La Hoche. It was taken into Lough Swilly. to Buncrana. He was taken ashore, taken to Dublin, and he died in Dublin. But it scared the British to the point where they sent this guy called William Smith, who was their chief architect, naval architect. He came to Lough Swilly and he saw, right, Dunree needs to be fortified. Leanan, which was another fort on Anaris, Ned's Point Battery outside Buncrana, Buncrana itself, Inch Fort, and the one over at McCamish.
Where's McCamish?
McCamish is the Martello Tower. If you're going up Lough Swilly, you can see there's an old stone round tower
I do see, and across the water.
across the water.
Over right, yeah.
That's called McCamish Fort, and that was built as a what's called a Martello Tower, which is a round stone tower, which is very hard to defeat from a naval point of view, because it's very strongly built with cannons inside it. And then there was one at Knockalla as well, directly across from Dunree. There's a fort there as well. So they took the guns off the French ship, the Hoche, and they put them on a battery at Knockalla and places like that. So that's why Buncrana was so important, because it was a base of operations for all that stuff going back to, well, 1800, let's say. All that was then developed, all those naval defences in Lough Swilly were developed from there.
And what was how can I say, like the people at the time, because the British were in, was there any animosity or?
Well, people say that you get conflicting reports on it, but as far as I can see, there was two camps. There was Buncrana being a garrison town where you had all these British sailors in it, you had all these British servicemen on it, and then you had the locals. Now they seemed to coexist.
But this was when it was under British rule anyway.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah. So people seem to get on with it. I mean, there's still lots of names, not name any names, but there's lots of names that you could trace back to British servicemen in Buncrana. It was always known as a garrison town. And it was also said that it was one of the reasons why soccer was so popular and so ingrained in the people, that it was brought by the English, much more so than Gaelic or hurling, although that's not true for Burt and places like that, or Oris, or, but they say one of the reasons that, Annie Sean in particular, as you know, has a great soccer pedigree. You probably know more about it than me, but one of the reasons that it's been said, now I don't know if there's any proof of it, but it is a very interesting point that this was brought there. You had soccer pitches for servicemen to play games, you know what I mean, to play football matches maybe against the locals or against their own teams, I was up in Lamberton's doing that talk there. W.J. O'Doherty built this fine big hay barn in the mid 1800s, but it was used as a while for a clubhouse for a soccer team. And the name of the soccer team is still up on the wall, and it's called Fawn Rangers.
What? So that's where their club was based, down there?
Yeah.
It seems really weird or bizarre that that was a pitch down there. Do people live close to that area? Because now it's like, no one goes there. Only who lives there.
But having said that, the train ran right past it.
Right.
So
okay.
And they had a halt there. And the reason they had a halt
so
there
was a stop too.
But one of the reasons they had a halt there was because the guy who designed the railway lived there, W.J. O'Doherty, so he conveniently put a stop right beside his house so he could get on the train, go to work in the morning to the area where we was going.
Fawn Rangers.
Yeah.
Was there a Celtic team around there?
Nobody seems to can find any info on them at all. It may have been like a local league or something, but Rangers may not have had the same connotations as it has today,
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's lots of teams that, like, I always think like Crossmaglen Rangers, for example.
True. Yep.
So it doesn't have the same political connotations.
I know what you're saying. Maybe it's Glasgow Rangers who really put that into, and obviously Glasgow Celtic. Yeah.
Although it's interesting that from Glasgow Celtic's very first challenge match was a friendly against Rangers. So, and they were apparently on very good terms back then.
Yes.
And the big enemy was Hibs, apparently.
Right.
Yeah.
When?
1880.
Well, no, Celtic was 1888, so I assume it was around then.
Yeah.
So Lough Swilly Railway came along. Did the same owners the buses, did the same owners, or was it?
It was the same owners up until 1981, when it was bought by a Buncrana businessman called P.J. Doherty. He sold some of the stations off, and he didn't reinvest. we didn't put the money back into it. But so anyway, eventually the buses continued to transport people and became part of everybody's folklore. Everybody went to school on a Lough Swilly bus. Everybody went to discos even on a Lough Swilly bus. Went to Derry on a Lough Swilly bus. I mean, they used to be parked on the bus depot in Buncrana. And we used to go as kids years ago with, we nowhere else to go with your girlfriend. You jumped on the bus for a wee bit of kissing or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's just part of everybody's part of everybody's memory. I mean, I did when we had a history society going here in Buncrana, but COVID sort of killed it, because nobody wanted to meet, and it kind of died a death. But one of the things that I did was I kept the Facebook page going, and I would post up stuff that would be of interest to anybody historically. And I did a post on this guy who I sort of found to be excellent. He was a specialist model maker, and he makes buses for people to order. And he made a couple of Lough Swilly buses for collectors. And he made, I don't know if you remember, maybe it's before your time, but there used to be a bus depot in Buncrana. It was called Lough Swilly. Just all it said on it was Lough Swilly.
Beside the Cruiskeen?
Where the Cruiskeen is now, yeah. He made an exact replica of it with a few buses outside, and I posted it on the Facebook page on it.
When you say a replica, like not a live, or like a human-sized replica?
No, like a scale replica.
Yeah.
Like a tabletop replica. Lots of people make model railways and stuff to that sort of scale. But I put photographs up on Facebook, and it got like something like 500,000 views. Like
Jesus.
Everybody. So it was a good bit of market research for anybody who's interested, to show just how popular, how ingrained Lough Swilly is in people's, conscious right here,
It's funny because I went to school in the Lough Swilly buses too, and I used to hate them because they were an old bus. There was no back on them. You had the iron bar behind you, and you had a shared seat.
Yeah.
So if you got the newer bus, which high back seat, and you'd in your seat, you had a good bus run, like
That's right. That's right. The bus with someone with a headrest on.
But there's, where are all them buses now?
Well, they were sold off. It all closed down, and well, anyway, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves there. But in 1981, PG Doherty bought it. He sold off places like Pennyburn Station for commercial retail building, stuff like that. But the buses carried on. They were getting some help from government. But in 2010, they got a bill from HMRC, the customs man in Britain. And some people say that the bill was only 30,000, but it was enough, £30,000. It was enough to finish to put them into liquidation. And they closed down in April 2014, and that brought an end to the Lough Swilly Railway Company transporting people. And they had done so for like 160 years. And it was kind of sad to see it going, but it was some going to last. They've been transporting people for 160 years. Incredible, But that ended it, and the buses were sold off. And again, we're just talking about how popular it was. People now would pay big money to get a Lough Swilly bus. I know people who were interested in with the Greenway coming up. The Greenway, they're hoping to follow the line of the Lough Swilly line, because the line is still there, as in the engineering that went into the rails are gone, but the actual line itself still there. People are trying to, the Greenway initiative is trying to get the Greenway going from Bridgend to Fawn, through Fawn to Buncrana, using that line. And people have said Lough Swilly buses would have been a great, even a coffee shop, or a great, even just to have on the side of a pub for an extra room, that's because it's so still ingrained in people's memories. As time goes on, of course, it'll fade like everything else. But for now, for most people, instantly recognise a Lough Swilly bus if they saw one.
Yeah, is the Greenway going to come? So obviously, there's a good bit of it there within around Inch.
There is, yeah.
But like, what about going from Derry to Bridgend, to Burnfoot, to Fawn?
Well, there's lots of issues there with people that have to buy back bits of the line have been incorporated into people's gardens and different things like that. So I don't know. There's going to be a legal battle, but the people who oversee these things, they say that there is as much put into a greenway as there is to a public road, because, excuse me, they see in years to come, and maybe not so many years to come, if you're going to Derry, you won't be going to Derry in your diesel car, you'll be going on your electric bicycle, to meet all these green targets. That the greenway is seen as a great opportunity to move people. And greenways have been very successful. Some of them have been very, very successful. There's one from Muff to Queen's Point, which runs along the road there, along the foil. It's a lovely wee. You see Wayne's out on bicycle and all, So hopefully now those, now at the same time, people do have problems with it, where it might be, you might have your house built, and you may not want masses of people passing your garden, and that's understandable too. I understand why people might see that as an issue.
Yeah, so I don't think it'd be much of an issue though, going from Derry to joining up there with Inch, like.
No,
Because there's nothing really. That's down a little. I assume it would follow the old railway, because
Yeah.
out behind Burnfoot there's nothing.
that's right.
You kind of go behind E&I,
Mm-hmm.
where the old one towers I called. I'm not sure what it was.
Burnfoot Station.
Yeah, but even before that, there used to be an old place where they would have, I think, would have butchered cows.
Oh yeah, aye, that's right.
Round about that.
Yeah.
And the thing about Burnfoot, that station isn't even in the village either.
No, it's not.
Was that the village?
No,
Or it was just a walkway over there? 'Cause there is a little house, a little station house
what's
there.
left of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that was never in the village. And again, that seemed to be a quite common thing, that they didn't actually go into population centres. They scared of them. Now,
Probably safer too.
possibly, yeah.
Because kids run about and stuff, like.
Maybe they didn't have access to.
You would have had to go way into and
Yeah.
out and stuff.
Yeah.
Is there much word on the Greenway that coming, even say any part of it?
Well, as far as I know, the plans are to progress it. Now, I know that there could be an issue at Fawn, because there's lots of land there at Fawn that would need to be. You can't go out the road at Fawn. The road through Fawn Village is very, very narrow. The footpaths are very, very narrow, so it wouldn't really be practical to run it. To have. For example, over outside Muff there, they have a big crash barrier along the side of the road. Then they have a nice tarmacked greenway cycle path, whatever you want to call it, and then a fence. But that takes up maybe, at least 2 meters, which they don't have that luxury in Fawn.
I don't know.
So I don't know what the solution is going to be to that. I really don't.
Yes.
But as an artist, as somebody who does public art, it'd be a great opportunity, and for somebody who's keenly interested in local heritage, for me, it would be a great opportunity to put, things, things of interest along there, sculptures along there, as almost as waymarkers, But that's only.
Yeah, and that's how I found out about you, is because I walk that walk
Yeah.
a lot, and up that bridge, and it's a turning point for me.
Yeah.
But I was just always interested in the railway, because it runs there, and obviously I scanned the QR code on the bridge, and I didn't know it was you, first of all, until I connected with you then, and you'd built that sculpture and all.
That's right,
It's interesting, it's good. I think we could do more of that and educate people about, what was here before.
Yeah, you don't have to give people a lot, if you give them something to get them interested, then they can go away and look at it and find out more if they want. And it was a nice way of marking. Tubin Junction was a very important junction. In the scheme of things, it's not important nowadays, I suppose, but back then it was, and I just thought it would be a nice way of lots of photographs of that junction. In 1953, the railway was closed, but a group of railway enthusiasts from England, photographers and people who used to write about railways, transport journalists, they commissioned the train to take them on the route for one last time, and they stopped at every stop, and they photographed everything, and they took some lovely photographs of Tubin Junction. And in those photographs, colour photographs for the 50s, was a lovely one of that signal post. And I thought, well, that's an ideal thing there to replace, to put back there. All you need is a signal post with the drop arm on it, just to say train on the line, and put up the old. Everybody's used to be really well sought after the no trespassing sign. So I got a loan of one of those from a guy in I think he was in Manor Cunningham, and we got it remolded and cast in aluminium and put it back up there. And I had hoped that it wouldn't be stolen, because these things do get stolen a lot. But where that is almost inaccessible. There's 2 channels of water, one either side of it. So to go down to steal that would be quite difficult. So I'm hoping he's
If it goes missing, they'll be blaming me.
Yeah, but no, it was a nice project to do, and again, the idea was that was waypoints along that walk to get people out walking. That's what it's all about.
Yes.
The Greenway is to try to promote a healthier lifestyle for people. I mean, everybody loves going for a walk. It's good for the body, but it's good for the mind as well. You know.
Yes, yes, yes.
Regarding the social history of the railway, perhaps hasn't been written yet. Of the social history around the LNLSR, but it's definitely something that should be studied more. And it was definitely a great boost, and it became part of the history and heritage of the area, and it's such a big subject, from technical point of view for people who like steam trains. There's a lot going on there because of all these special trains that they had to construct, narrow gauge and narrow gauge format and so on. So it's a very interesting subject.
Yes.
But
Well, we'll wrap it up there,
Okay.
John. It's been really, really, really interesting.
Okay.
Thank you so much for taking out the time
You're
to
welcome.
come here and speak about Donegal local railway, and just in general. It's funny how there's other parts of history that you started talking about that I actually found interesting. Wolf Tone as well, and
Yeah.
the likes of that and stuff. So, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks very much for having me.
And if people want to connect with you,
I'm currently doing a cross community program in Derry. We're looking at the history of migration and immigration and emigration. And I have set up, but I didn't really get going this year, right? I've set up a walking history tour of Buncrana.
very good.
So, yeah, so that's where I'm at.
And that's going to start when?
Well, the walking history tour, I have done a few tours at the Donegal Historical Society out there in the summer, and just put on some flyers and stuff. So if anybody wants to contact me, I will go to my Facebook page, John McCarron, or Instagram. You'll find me on Instagram, John_Mac_Cairn, and I'll put up some information about that. It's kind of late on the season for it this year. I'm hoping to do this program and get going properly next year with it.
Good stuff.
That's the
Wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.